Hi everyone, this video is looking at paper 2 reading exam. This will be the one you'll do next Wednesday. This is reading non-fiction, so something that has really happened. So it's a 2-hour exam with 1 hour for the reading, 1 hour for the writing. If you have 25% extra time, you've got an extra half an hour. Okay, so let's look at the reading exam. You have two texts to read, one from the 21st century and one for the 19th. So basically one new one and one older one, but don't panic, the one from the 19th century will still be easy for you to read. So the way it works is there's 6 questions. Questions 1 and 2 will be on the modern text, 3 and 4 will be on the older one, and 5 and 6 together. Okay, so the colour codes on this screen do mean something, okay? So where I put find info, that basically means comprehension. So what I mean by that is if question 1A it says how much time did the men ski in each day, this is 1B. Let's say for example it said 12 hours, you can literally put they spent 12 hours skiing. So the ones in green on this screen, the questions that I put in green, they are basically just finding information. In questions 1 and 3, you put A, B and C and just answer the questions. And in 5 and 6, you're doing exactly the same, but you're just putting it into a sentence. So for example, explain what we learn about the food that they find, question 5. All you would do is you look for the extract, find all the things you could find about food, find the quotes and just put them into a sentence, as opposed to 1 and 3 where you're just doing one line. So 5 and 6 you'd put into sentences. Questions 2 and 4 are how questions, very similar to paper 1 reading exam. So they're worth 10 marks. Remember, use your brain. If it's only worth 3 or 4 marks, you have a lot of time. If it's a 10-mark question, you need to have about 13 to 15 minutes. You must time manage. Look at the clock before starting each question. So don't look at the clock and then look at it again 15 minutes later. My exam technique would be, if I know I've got 15 minutes and I'm starting my exam at 9:30, I look at the clock and I think to myself, right, I need to finish this question at 9:45, then at 9:45 I move on. Okay, so again, here are just the timings for each question. If it's a 10-mark question, about 14 or 15 minutes. If it's like a 3 or 4-mark question, about 6 or 7 minutes. These are good things to get into your head, by the way, so this is quite an important slide if you're making notes. Okay, so good exam technique for the reading exam. Leave a 1-line gap between each quote and PE, so it's nice and clear for the examiner. Start a new page for each question. So for example, with question 2, you do your answer and then it's on a blank new page. At the end of the exam, you might be able to go back and add some more PEs at the bottom of the page. Put quotation marks around every quote. If you're using a quote, we want you to get rewarded, so make sure you put quotation marks. And like the one I said, look at the clock before starting each question. Okay, question 1. I told you earlier it's comprehension, so it's really simple. So you read the article, it's in the bottom left. One of the questions is how much time did the men ski in each day? And basically you'll look through this article, you look through it, and then somewhere in there it will say 12 hours a day. I'm not going to do it now, but I can't remember. Somewhere in there says they work 12 hours a day. And all you do is find the answers in the text and put it into a sentence. Okay, 16 hours a day, there you go. So so don't just put down one word, answer the question, but remember, you don't need to do a PE or anything like that. So that's it for question 1. The main thing about question 1 is it's a nice, simple question. If you can't find an answer, because some students say to me, I can't find it, it wasn't in there. It will be in there, but if you can't find it, leave it, and then you can go back to the end of the exam. There's no point spending 5 minutes looking for 1 mark. You've got to get onto the 10-mark questions. So question 2 will always be worth 10 marks, and you're about 13 to 15 minutes on it, and you've got about 5 to 10 quotes. So an example would be, you read the extract and it says, how does the writer make it tense and dramatic? So why do we want a lot of quotes? Well, basically we want a lot of quotes because they get you marks. So again, these 2 students, they gave the same sort of answer. Really good answers. However, the person on the left had not got into their head that they needed to do quotes. So they only did 2 quotes, and because of that, they only got about 2 out of 10. But the person on the right got into their head, I need to put quotes in loads of times, even if I don't have to explain every quote. Remember, if the quote is really simple, you don't have to explain it. So these 2 people are very at a similar standard, but because the one on the right's got a better exam technique, they knew how to do quotes, they all get a lot higher marks. Okay, so the how question, explain why you picked the quote and why the writer has used those words for an effect. And do as many as you can in 13 minutes. Remember, I've said to you try to do 5 to 8 quotes, but it's just about the time. If after 13 minutes you've done 1 quote, you move on to the next question. If after 13 minutes you've done 8 quotes, it doesn't matter. You move on to the End of the question, end of the exam. You've got to finish the exam. So this question is all about zooming in on keywords and thinking, why has the writer used them? So if we look at this example, this is an extract about a young boy. This is a real exam question. A young teenager, he broke the world record because he sailed around the world on his own. So the question would be, how does the writer show Mike's trip was tough? That is the question. Okay, so this is the article. It's available on Teams if you want to get it. So this is the extract. So what I would do is I would read this extract, and with my highlighter, I would highlight 7 or 10 quotes that make his trip or voyage sound tough or difficult. Remember, if you don't know a word, so for example, in the second paragraph here, it says grueling. If you don't know what grueling means, leave it. Don't guess. There will be enough in the article for you to talk about. Okay, so for this question, to get a grade 5 or above, you would get a quote and say why it makes the trip sound difficult. You would do 1 or 2 sentences per quote, and you would do no waffle along PEs. Remember, we want you to talk about 7 or 8 points in little detail as opposed to 2 huge PEs about 2 quotes. Remember, it doesn't matter how good your explanation is. If you only do 2 quotes, you're going to be lucky to get more than 2 out of 10. So for example, if it said in the extract, it's not in this one, but I've actually made this one up. If it said Mike had huge blisters on his hands from day one. So remember, if he's sailing around the world, because of the ropes and stuff, his hands are like that from day one, okay? If the question was, how does the writer show Mike's trip was tough, and he had huge blisters on his day, why is that tough? Well, I would put, the writer makes the voyage seem tough by describing Mike having huge blisters on his hands from day one. This tells the reader he was in pain all the way through the trip. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? If you had huge blisters on your hands, you are going to be in pain. That is why it makes the trip sound tough. My little starting sentence here, the writer makes the voyage seem tough by describing Mike. I would do that sentence just as my little introduction. After that, for my next 5 or 6 quotes, don't bother writing. The writer makes the voyage seem tough. You're just going to waste time. After doing it the first time, just give me a quote and say why it makes his trip sound tough. Okay, another one. If it said Mike did the trip solo, so solo means as in on his own, why does that make Mike's trip sound tough? Well, okay, so it basically seems tough because he did the whole trip alone and with no help from others. So you could talk about that it was hard to do because he would have to do all the sailing on his own, or you could do it from a point of view where he might get lonely. But obviously, if he had a whole team of 20 people helping him, it's going to be a lot easier. But the fact he did everything on his own makes it tough. Okay, another one. If it said Mike experienced monstrous storms, how does that make it seem tough? It could have put Mike experienced storms. It could have put Mike experienced big storms. But why have they used that word, that adjective monstrous? What does the writer want us to think when he says monstrous? Well, if you think about monstrous, what do you think of? You think of a monster. You think of something that's scary. You think of something that's tough. You think that it's something that's powerful. So I put monstrous makes it sound like the weather was scary, big and powerful, because that's what the word monstrous means to me. Notice in this PE it's 1 sentence. I've not started it by going another way that Mike found the trip tough is. I've just given my quote and said why it makes it sound tough. Okay, another one, same again. This time is, I'm going to just give you a few in a row. It does get very lonely. Okay, I've put this makes it seem tough as Mike has no one to talk to. Okay, so I'd get a mark for that. But remember, if it's a really, really obvious quote, don't bother explaining it. So for example, this example, I would get a mark for just going, another way it seems tough is that Mike got very lonely, and I would just put very lonely in my quotation marks, and that would be enough to get a mark. So remember, if it's really obvious, don't explain the quote. He battled 50-foot waves. Okay, they've told us the size of the waves. Okay, to show the reader the waves absolutely huge. They could have said Mike had to deal with 50-foot waves. They've put battled. What do they want us to make us think? Well, a battle is a war. It's a fight. So I put this suggests the waves are gigantic and Mike had to fight against them. And the boat went berserk. Again, they could have said the boat was hard to control. They've put berserk, which means erratic, crazy, uncontrollable. And that's why they've put that in that sentence. So this is tough as it makes the boat sound tough and predictable. Okay, remember, if you're running out of time on a 10-mark question, forget about the PEs and just pick out quotes. So that one about lonely, if I've got time, I might want to put, Mike says he's lonely on the trip. This makes it seem tough as Mike has no one to talk to when he's feeling low. But if I'm running out of time, just put another way it seems tough is when Mike says he's lonely. So I'm ignoring this bit. I'm not doing the explanation, just put the quotes in there. So if you've got a couple of minutes left, just put the quotes in and you don't need to explain it. And again though, if it's a really obvious quote, you don't need to explain it anyway. Just move on to your next quote. Question 3 is exactly the same as question 1, but it's on the other extract. So you read the other extract and you just answer it. So for example, what animals did Scott have him on the expedition? If the answer is horses, you can just put Scott had horses on the expedition with him. Really simple, we don't need to spend time looking at it. Question 4 is very similar to question 2. It's another how question. It might just be slightly worded differently. So for example, it might say thoughts and feelings. So in that case, you look for the extract and just find a few opinions about what someone says about something. So this extract is about a man who breaks his leg climbing a mountain. That's Joe Simpson. And the question is, in this extract, Joe Simpson is involved in a tense and dramatic situation. How far do you agree? So you're basically just going to say you agree at the start and then 5 or 6 quotes to show that it is a tense and dramatic situation. Okay. It's basically the same as question 2, the how question. The only difference is you must agree with the question. It won't always be a question where it says, do you agree? It might say, what are the writer's thoughts and feelings about prisons, for example? And then you'd go through it and find 5 or 6 quotes that they say about prisons and say, he thinks it's awful with this code, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so in this question, how far do you agree if it's tense? You would say, I agree it's tense, and then give me 5 or 6 quotes and explain them. So you can look for 1 or 2 word phrases. Again, it's going to be very rare that you copy out a couple of sentences as a quote. So just look for 1 or 2 word phrases. So the quote is, he broke his leg and it was a shattering blow in the knee. So I've zoomed in on shattering and I've put, I agree the writer makes it tense with the quote, shattering blow in the knee. This suggests Joe was blown to pieces. So I've put shattering blow in the knee there, but I could have just put shattering. So if you shatter, Joe's knee has got Beyonce's whacking this car window. That's what's happened to Joe. That's what a shatter is. So this student has received the mark for linking the word shattering to Joe's knee being blown to pieces. Another quote was, when he broke his leg, he screamed. Okay, so screamed, this suggests Joe was in agony from the pain in his knee. Again, the student would get a mark because they've linked the word screamed to the guy being in enormous pain. Okay, question 5. This is the first one where we have to look at both texts, but main thing is to get into your head, you don't need to compare. You don't say blah, 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 in contrast, likewise. You don't compare. The question is, look at both texts. According to these writers, how do the cells in the prisons add to the prisoner's sense of isolation? Okay, so the main thing is it's about both texts. All you would do is, remember, you would have read both texts at this stage. You would just go into it and you'd find the information the question wants. Remember, it's only worth 4 marks. You're only finding information. Remember, this isn't a PE, you're just finding information. So this is the same as question 1 and question 3, but it's for both texts. The only difference is you're going to put it into sentences and a bit of a paragraph. Don't compare in this question. You don't need PEs. Be clear which text you're talking about. There's no right or wrong way to do this. The easier way for me to do it would be just to use their surnames. So it will say the writer's names in the extract, just use their names. Okay, so this question would be, go through both texts and find the information the question has asked you to find, and again, just put it into a sentence. Okay, so I'll give you a simple one. This is about, this is on Teams, by the way, this extract. Explain what we learn about the food Scott and Fogel took with them on the expeditions. So you'd go through the extracts, find anything they said about food, and put it into a sentence. So for example, Fogel had lots of food, salami, chocolate, cheese, chicken, spaghetti, bolognese. They're all quotes. And I've put, Scott had rationed meat, biscuits and a thin breakfast. That is literally it to the question. You don't have to compare. You don't have to say this suggests. All you're doing is finding the information and putting it in a sentence like this. I put my Fogel one at the top. I put my Scott one at the bottom. I've made it clear which extract I'm talking about and I put my quotes in. Remember, it's only 4 marks. It's an easy question. Question 6, okay, I want you to ignore where it says compare, okay? Ignore compare. All we're going to do is we're going to do exactly the same as question 5, but we're going to get more quotes. That's the only difference between question 5 and question 6. So ignore where it says compare. And this question would be, it's about prisons, and all you've got to do is find information about solitary confinement. Okay, it's the same as question 5, but you need more quotes because it's a 10-mark question. You don't need to do PEs. You don't need to say the writer is suggesting or the effect of this word or anything like that. Just find the quotes the question is asking for and put into sentences. And you're running out of time probably on this question because it's the last one. Try to find at least 2 quotes from both extracts. Remember, you have to talk about both extracts. Don't worry if you feel like you might be repeating points or quotes from previous questions. That's absolutely fine to use a quote twice for this question. And use this structure again. Use their surnames as the easiest way to make it clear which text you're talking about. So you would just find the quotes the question is asking you for from both texts and put into separate paragraphs. So this quote was about, this question is about prisons and prisoners being in cells on their own in solitary confinement. And all you do is find a couple of quotes from both texts about being in solitary confinement and put them into a paragraph. Exactly the same as question 5, but a few more quotes needed. Okay, so one of the extracts said these quotes, so I put them into a paragraph, and the other quote said this about solitary confinement, so I put them in the paragraph. But again, all I'm doing is literally putting quotes into the paragraph. I'm not explaining the quote. I'm not saying the writer suggests blah, blah, blah. Okay, final tips for the reading then. Time manage. When your time is up on a question, move on. If it's a 5-minute question, you move on after 5 minutes. If it's a 15-minute question, you move on after 15 minutes. If you've got one quote, it doesn't matter. If you've got 10 quotes, it doesn't matter. You don't spend more time on a question than it deserves because you will run out of time. Remember sort of the 3 or 4 mark questions about 5 minutes and the 10 mark questions 13 to 15. Keep your eye on the clock throughout the exam. Leave a one line gap between all PE so it's clear. There's no need to say a word is a verb, noun or adjective on the 10 mark questions. Just say what effect it has. If you run out of time on a 10 mark question, don't do a PE, just put in the quote. Yeah, you don't need to explain it. And finish all questions. That's the main thing to get over to. If you finish all questions, you've got an amazing chance of getting a grade 4 or above. Any questions, go into Teams, but hopefully that has been some use to you.